The Detroit Pistons of the late 1980s are forever known as the Bad Boys, a nickname that conjures images of bruising defense, relentless contact, and a team persona that broke NBA norms for sportsmanship and flair. While the phrase might suggest a random collection of villains, the truth behind the Pistons' emergence is far more compelling. Their ascent was meticulously built around a shared ethic of physical play, an underdog spirit, and an unabashed willingness to bend the game to their advantage. The creation of the Bad Boys was not just a rebranding, it was a blueprint that led the Pistons to 2 NBA championships and left a mark on the league's culture for years to come. To understand where the Pistons' attitude came from, one must rewind to the early 1980s, when Detroit's basketball reputation was overshadowed by the likes of the Los Angeles Lakers and the Boston Celtics. The Showtime Lakers, featuring Magic Johnson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, dazzled fans with fast breaks and smiles, while Larry Bird's Celtics combined fundamentals with gritty resolve. Detroit, meanwhile, languished with losing records and an unremarkable identity. That changed in the 1981 NBA Draft, when the Pistons selected Isaiah Thomas, a diminutive point guard from Indiana University. Thomas, quick, confident, and fiercely competitive, would soon embody the team's combative personality. Yet he alone wasn't enough to turn Detroit into contenders overnight. Throughout the mid-1980s, general manager Jack McCloskey methodically assembled a supporting cast that matched Thomas's fire. One of the earliest key additions was Bill Laimbeer, a big man with a knack for rebounds, mid-range shooting, and, most notoriously, annoying opponents through shoves, elbows, and theatrics. Over time, McCloskey added Rick Mahorn, a bruiser under the rim, Vinnie Johnson, known as the Microwave for his hot scoring streaks, Joe Dumars, a calm but deadly accurate guard, and a young Dennis Rodman, whose boundless energy, lateral quickness, and rebounding prowess fit perfectly into a team that demanded total commitment to defense. Chuck Daly, hired as head coach in 1983, would become the mastermind who transformed this assortment of talents into a cohesive and confrontational unit. The NBA of the mid to late 1980s adored scoring feats and offensive showmanship. The Pistons, by contrast, decided to succeed on their own terms. Defensively, they embraced a confrontational style, double teams, hand-checking, relentless body contact, and well-timed hard fouls. They didn't just win on defense, they demoralized opponents by turning every possession into a war of attrition. Their willingness to deliver body checks and no-fly zone blockouts under the basket left scorers bruised and frustrated. Meanwhile, Isaiah Thomas orchestrated the offense with an uncanny blend of skill and swagger. If the referees didn't call the Pistons' rough tactic, the Bad Boys continued without remorse. Journalists and rival fans soon labeled them dirty, complaining that the Pistons broke unwritten rules of sportsmanship. To the Pistons, though, it was precisely this attitude that turned them from also-rans into contenders. When teams expected polite competition, Detroit offered a punishing alternative. And if these squads tried to strike back, they entered the same domain, tough, grinded-out hoops that the Pistons had mastered. The moniker Bad Boys arose organically from commentators and adversaries, but the Pistons leaned into it, even marketing the label with merch and promotional material. Rather than deny their reputation, they flaunted it. The NBA's power structure then was dominated by the Lakers and Celtics, who faced off in 3 finals between 1984 and 1987. The Pistons, with their unapologetic brand of physical basketball, had to force the league, and the public, to take them seriously. A turning point arrived in the 1987 Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics. Detroit pushed Boston to a Game 7, and in Game 5, Isaiah Thomas infamously attempted an inbounds pass late in the fourth quarter, which Larry Bird stole before feeding Dennis Johnson for a winning layup. That one heartbreak, ironically, forged the Pistons' collective will. They returned in 1988, surging to the NBA Finals where they battled the Lakers in a grueling 7-game showdown. Though Detroit fell just short, the league recognized that a new power was brewing in the Motor City. By 1989, the Pistons were in full stride. Chuck Daly's defensive schemes tightened, and the confidence of the roster soared. Laimbeer's knack for aggravating opponents was matched by Rick Mahorn's raw muscle. Dennis Rodman emerged as a defensive ace and unstoppable rebounder, later winning back-to-back Defensive Player of the Year award. Joe Dumars balanced Thomas's brashness with quiet intensity, and the bench offered depth that mirrored the starter's grit. The team soared to 63 wins and blazed through the playoffs. In the Eastern Conference Finals, they exacted revenge on the rival Chicago Bulls, led by a rising Michael Jordan, before facing the Lakers again in the finals. This time, Detroit showed no mercy, sweeping Los Angeles 4-0 and securing the franchise's first championship in team history. The following year, 1990, the Pistons repeated their success, defeating Jordan's Bulls once more in the Eastern Conference Finals and conquering the Portland Trail Blazers in the finals. This cemented their place as back-to-back champions, and the Bad Boys brand soared. However, their provocative style caused others, fans, the media, and even league officials, to question if the Pistons had gone too far. Fights and flagrant fouls were common in their games. Opposing players frequently voiced that there was nothing playful about Detroit's brand of intimidation. It felt more like open warfare. But for the Pistons, it was precisely that sense of siege mentality that united them and propelled them to greatness. Ironically, their own success helped accelerate their downfall. The Chicago Bulls, tired of being beaten and physically manhandled, toughened up and added strategic wrinkles to overcome the Pistons in 1991. That year's Eastern Conference Finals saw a remarkable shift, with Michael Jordan and his teammates finally out-muscling the Bad Boys and sweeping them 4-0. Detroit's era ended with Isaiah Thomas and others walking off the court before the final buzzer of Game 4, a snub that further fueled the Pistons' image as defiant rule-breakers. Soon after, the roster broke apart, key veterans retired, were traded, or lost their edge, and the once-feared dynasty crumbled. Yet the influence of that era radiates even now. The Pistons not only grabbed 2 championships but demonstrated that defense, and a collective identity as enforcer, could topple star-laden juggernaut. Their approach forced the NBA to re-examine rules on physical contact, eventually leading to stricter regulations on hand-checking and flagrant fouls. The league recognized how fights and overly aggressive tactics might compromise its broader image. At the same time, many fans admired the Pistons for their unapologetic grit, seeing them as working-class heroes willing to trade elbows with glossier franchises from glamour market. Culturally, the Bad Boys crystallized the idea that a team can embrace being the villain and still capture the public's fascination. Detroit proudly sold merchandise adorned with skulls, crossbones, and the phrase, Bad Boys. The players never apologized for an ounce of their bruising style, arguing that if the referees didn't call it, they'd keep doing it. That sense of not caring about external validation made them legends. In an NBA that often spotlights flashy superstars, the Pistons embraced role players, Dennis Rodman rebounding relentlessly, Bill Laimbeer muscling under the boards, Vinnie Johnson erupting for buckets off the bench. Each piece fit a broader ethos of sacrifice and intimidation. Decades later, the Bad Boys remain a compelling study in how mental and physical tenacity can overwhelm even the most talented lineup. They reminded the world that building a championship squad can mean more than just collecting all-stars. It can also hinge on forging an identity fierce enough to rattle opponents psychologically. Their rivalry with Jordan's Bulls became the stepping stone for Michael Jordan's eventual dynasty, but it also stands as proof that in the late 1980s, the league's center of power shifted, even if briefly, to a team that talked big and backed it up with ferocious defense. In the grand timeline of the NBA, the Bad Boys, Pistons occupy a unique space, a champion that didn't rely on a singular transcendent scorer, nor on pristine elegance. Instead, they fought, they scrapped, and they brought fans a brand of basketball that was either exhilarating or infuriating, depending on which side of the fence you stood. By doing so, they won the ultimate prize twice, bending the league's narrative to their will for a time. Years after those back-to-back titles, fans continue to debate the Pistons' legacy. Some see them as trailblazers of an era when defense truly reigned. Others bemoan their tactic, claiming they fouled at every turn and tarnished the beauty of the sport. Regardless, the path they took from underdogs to bullies, and eventually champions, demonstrates that the only universal truth in the NBA is that there's no single recipe for success. The Bad Boys proved you can win by challenging every assumption about sportsmanship and style, forging a distinctly abrasive identity that echoed across the hardwood and into the annals of basketball legend.